Flip it. I know BDA page on your BDA. Okay.
All of that relates to an increase or decrease in our grants revenues. And there are no other changes in the other funds. Due to the CARES Act funding of a little over $1 million, we will need to request an additional appropriation from the city. Again, that is grant related only, and it's no new funds
He wants
from
me
the
to go
city.
up there.
I'll be happy to answer any specific questions.
Motion first. Second. Any discussion? Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alice?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes. Item 5B, support for state school resource officer grant. Dr. Harrison?
Mr. Chairman, you hear about your phone blowing up. Mine actually may. Everybody, there's a lot of folks who like to see this online. So we are going to live stream it on BVEA's Facebook page, and so I'm trying to respond to some of those requests. In the meantime, as you know, the governor ordered this called a special session in October. One of the topics that we discuss whenever they go back is to reduce state funding for school resource officers. Several larger school divisions, or not several, some larger school divisions are looking to remove the school resource officer program from their schools. And I think that's much different in other parts of the Commonwealth than it is in rural Virginia. I think that we have an excellent school resource officer program where the main focus of our school resource officers is to enhance safety. They're actually the most important part of our safety plan. And you can go to almost any school that we have, elementary, middle, and high, and the first person that somebody's going to see when they drop their child off at the school is our resource officers who are there greeting families, welcoming them, and building good relationships. And so Senator Killian is going to take our message to Richmond with him. If you approve this resolution supporting keeping funding for the state school resource officer grant.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the resolution for state school resource officer grant.
Any discussion? Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alice?
Yes.
Mr. Foster?
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yes. Item 5C, approval of regulation, JED Part 4, attendance procedures for online learning. Dr. Perry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as you know, one of the metrics we're graded on for school accreditation is reducing chronic absenteeism. Our focus is going to shift this year, and even if we lose accreditation, we are not going to pressure any of our students to come in school if they're not feeling well. We want them to follow all the proper protocols. However, as some of our students will be taking virtual classes, we do have to develop a procedure to count them present or absent, and that Mr. Ritchie has worked to put together this attendance procedures for online learning. You'll probably see many school divisions across the Commonwealth doing this because we're going into uncharted territory again, and so here's our solution to that issue.
Chairman, I make a motion for approval of regulation JED attendance procedures for all learning.
I have some questions about this. First of all, in bullet number 2, teachers will work individually with students to give them the opportunity to make up missed work in a reasonable amount of time. Bullet 4, students, even with remote learning, will be permitted an excused absence with a medical or doctor's excuse. Who's going to keep up with that?
The teachers, as they take attendance.
And the seventh bullet, if there's no activity after a week, teachers will contact the student and or family. The thing to me is that this seems to be throwing a whole lot of stuff on the teachers. I mean, we've got teachers now that are worried about their health. We've got teachers that have to clean up their classrooms. We've got teachers that are gonna have to keep control in the halls wherever the kids are, whatever's going on. We've got teachers who are doing lesson plans for distance learning. We've got teachers who are doing lesson plans for their in-house students. They're trying to make up tests. They're trying to do everything for them. Now they have to do all of this stuff. They're doing the attendance too. But then, isn't there someone else in the school, an administrator, we talk about an attendance officer who can notify the parents of these things? If the seems to me we would help the teachers if we provided someone for them to hand it to and say, can you take care of this because I'm really tied up with this, trying to get all my work in, and then making up time with these kids after everything else?
Mr. Wright, I'm not sure what your question is, but, you know, the classroom teacher.
My question is, there's a whole lot of stuff going on in classroom teachers here.
Right.
They need some help.
Right, but nobody can take attendance in a classroom except for the teacher.
That's
in
true,
the classroom.
but somebody can get in touch with their parents or follow up on that. Does the teacher decide whether that's excused or unexcused?
Well, anytime that there is a parent note, as you can see, doctor's notes can be an excused absence.
The parent notes don't count, right?
They do, yes,
I
sir.
thought it wrote down here that they didn't.
My computer said, can you, which bullet is it?
It is only a doctor's excuse for it.
Hold on.
That's what this said.
Last bullet.
The last bullet.
Just 1 second.
It's up on the screen. The very last one.
It's it right there.
Yeah, I would agree
You would agree what?
that needs to be removed.
So, parent notes will be accepted as excused.
They will be under our current, just as our current attendance policy.
But if the parent just says, someone's feeding the kid, didn't feel like doing it that day, and they say, well, he was sick.
Right, that's not any different than in-person.
Excuse.
Right, it would be same as in-person learning.
Do we have attendance officers in every school?
We have at the middle and at the high school.
And what about the elementary schools?
We do not.
What are they gonna be doing? Where they said they turned it over to the attendance officer, who they turn it over to?
The middle school and high school attendance officers also help with some elementary students after they get past a certain level. Principals do that the rest of the time.
Because it's one of the reasons why online learning is such a nightmare anyway. Question, is this our regulation or is this a state regulation?
This is our regulation, taken in conjunction with guidance from BOE and working with other school divisions. Mr. Ritchie, the assistant superintendents from different divisions have worked on this some together. And then we also received guidance from BOE about how attendance could be taken in a virtual model. Is Mr. Ritchie with us? Ms. Jones, Mr. Ritchie can probably answer any specific questions that you have as well.
When they do an absence, is this recorded just as a class absence or a day absence?
At the high school, it would be a class absence. At the elementary school, depending on if they were there any part of the day, it could be a complete daily absence.
If they were there part of the day, it could be a complete daily absence?
If they were not there part of the day, it would be a full day absence. But we take period attendance at the upper levels and daily attendance at the lower levels. Mr. Foster, you're exactly right. Virtual learning certainly provides challenges, and this is one of them that a lot of school boards are going to be dealing with between now and the opening of school.
Well, if this is an attempt to make sure that our online learning students present. I think that was a struggle this spring. That we really had no recourse, and I think this is just an effort to just trying to get you to be in class.
It is. Obviously, it's a way to make sure that students are engaged, but we also have to report our average daily attendance and our average daily membership to the Department of Education. And if we don't have policies on how attendance is going to be taken, it will cause us some issues. Now, participation is one of those. Being present, as teachers teach virtually is another. And so, it's not, this policy will not be perfect. By any stretch of the imagination, we don't anticipate teachers making home visits trying to, rouse a child up to get them to participate in an online. I mean, we still will be using our truancy officers, but as far as recording the attendance, teachers would be required to do that. And just like in-person attendance, if we have a child that's out and they're falling behind, oftentimes our teachers do reach out to those families out of concern as well. And I don't think we're asking them to do anything additional. I think it's just, this is just going to be another harder way to track attendance versus what attendance looks like in a normal pre-March 13th model.
And that's what I was going to say about just Zoom meetings that I'm been participating in. I don't know who's on there half the time anyway, because you only get a certain amount of squares that come up. And a lot of times, just because their name's on there, it doesn't mean that they're participating, because they don't have a camera. Is there any way we can track that?
Participation, turning in your assignments, making satisfactory academic progress is going to be as good an indicator about participation as whether or not you log into a computer program or to a Zoom meeting.
What time of day will the classes start?
So they will follow a normal schedule. We're asking teachers to let parents know ahead of time when they will be providing either live instruction or a web feed of instruction, and also to let parents know about office hours. A lot of those office hours will be on the Fridays when we're doing everyone remote. But yeah, so that is one big key is communicating what the expectations are very early on in the process. And some teachers will be doing Zoom meetings, like you say, or Teams meetings at certain times where students will have to log in. Others will have recorded instruction. Another difference from what we did in the spring is we do anticipate there being a whole lot more teaching, live teaching or recorded teaching being provided instead of the number of assignments without that instructional piece that we did have a few issues with over the spring.
How do you administer exams and quizzes, tests?
With a lot of trust and faith. Some things will be done online, but how you can determine whether a student is doing that on their own or with assistance is going to be very challenging. So we're going to do our very best to teach and to assess and to make sure students are learning. But obviously, you've heard me say this multiple times, we'll do our very best with virtual instruction or remote instruction, but it's inferior to in-person instruction, no question.
Will you still be doing the SOL tests this year?
Currently, SOL tests have not been canceled. The state has indicated that they would probably apply for a waiver if the feds allow that, but right now the feds are not showing a lot of promise that they're going to waive the requirement for standardized testing.
So if we do this, then the students who are doing online learning are also responsible for passing that SOL test.
Yes, sir.
It's going to be interesting.
Yes, sir.
Give it to them.
I'm not sure, sir.
I mean, there are laws about that. I just thought, there are rules as to who can actually give those kids the test and under what circumstances.
Yeah, there will certainly be challenges that will solve those problems when we get to them, if we get to them. But currently, under What we know right now, if a student is in a test that requires an SOL test, whether virtual or in person, those tests will be required. How we manage that, I certainly don't have those answers yet. I guess there'll be a lot of praying that we get the waiver.
What do you think that they will be marked as virtuals, whatever?
And students will be marked. We already have that prepared in our student database, and so.
In the SOL testing?
Yeah, but they pull that information from our database.
Okay, but that will be cleared like somebody.
That is our intention.
I don't really care about that, so well, anyway, everybody knows how I feel about it. But it's not gonna be like a state, if you would say, mandate on how to actually go through with SOL testing, or would that, they would have to give us guidance for that.
That would be dictated to us, yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, if that is all the discussion, I certainly would not be opposed to removing the last bullet and improving our attendance regulation. If you prefer, we could also table that, make additional changes that we receive and bring it back for the August 17th meeting.
Do we need to redo the motion then, since we're removing the bullet from it? I don't think because the motion was approved as written.
Motion.
Has to be rescinded. Who amended it has to be rescinded.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to rescind my motion. I'm going to rescind my motion to accept the policy as written. Do I make a new policy, a new motion now to?
I'll second for research.
Let's do that.
Hang on.
Let's do that, and then would you like?
So your motion is to remove.
My motion is to rescind the motion I made to accept it.
Mr. Ellis, I think you can amend your original motion to remove the last bullet.
Okay, let's
If you could, amend the motion to do that.
The motion I made to approve the regulation JEDR4, continuous procedure for online learning, I want to make that motion and remove the last bullet.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodmaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
No.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Approval of 2020-2021 rezoning. Dr. Parrish.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and distinguished guests, as you know, at our last school board meeting, we introduced the potential of doing some rezoning, and Mr. Fletcher made some suggestions about how we could present the material so that it'd be clear, and so we have added a few slides and some additional data. As you can see here, this is our current school district boundaries. On the far left, you'll see Stonewall Jackson's area. Right beside that, you'll see Washington Lee. Beside that, you'll see Highland View, and the large area in yellow is the Van Pelt. It goes all the way from Clear Creek, currently all the way down to William Street, which is near the Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee sign. So moving on to the next slide. The current record, there's, as you can see, that's where our students live in those areas. Too far? Slides that slide through. All right, so in the Washington Lee, in the Stonewall, currently in the Stonewall Jackson area, this you can see this area. This currently the recommendation to rezone affects 36 students who were pre-K through 4 last year. That is on the right side of Commonwealth Avenue. And as you can see, that is what Stonewall Jackson's map looks like currently. the area in question is the offset at the bottom of the screen. If you approve this recommendation, the next slide will show you what the new Stonewall Jackson zone will look like. It makes that the Commonwealth Avenue a natural border instead of going all the way to Piedmont on the bottom side of the Union. So that gives you a better idea of what that zone will look like if this recommendation is approved. Moving to the next slide, as you can see, there they are side by side in the before and after for Stonewall. And there's Washington Lee's current school zone. And after the change, you will see that Washington Lee will again follow Commonwealth Avenue as the border. There's a good before and after shot of Washington, the zone if you do approve this recommendation. And there's the area in question. Again, that affects 36 students who will be rising kindergartners through 5th grade. So the impact on Washington Lee, as you can see, that does cause an issue in 1st grade. Our class sizes would be too large there, but everywhere else we would have very positive class size numbers. And one piece of data that I didn't share with you last time, on the total enrollment on this, we have 2 teachers at each grade level at Washington Lee, so you can divide those numbers by 2 to see what class sizes would look like. So as you can see, that other than that 1st grade, class sizes would still be very small at Washington Lee, even with this change. One piece of data on the next slide that you'll see that we didn't share with you the impact that this would have on Stonewall Jackson. As you can see, those numbers now become very balanced. Instead of having 20 to 22 students in a class at Stonewall Jackson, those class sizes also become more manageable as well.
Can I interrupt you for
Yes, sir, absolutely.
To go back on that, this total enrollment, that's what these figures.
Our data from last year at the end of the school year, yes, sir.
Last year at the end of the school year. Last year. And we're gonna have 2 teachers with kindergarten?
Yeah, we will. Now keep in mind that pre-K, some of our students use Head Start or don't go to pre-K at all. And so next year's kindergarten numbers are going to be low in all of these scenarios because we don't serve all students across the city in pre-K. So you're probably aware we did have to hire an additional teacher and do a 1st grade, 2nd grade split at Van Pelt last year. Potentially that teacher may stay in that position at Van Pelt. However, we may pull that teacher to Washington Lee to reduce the class sizes of that 1st grade. We'll just see how the numbers end up shaking out. The worst case scenario, I think, is we would have to hire a new elementary teacher to help reduce the class sizes there at Washington Lee. Okay. So this next slide, we're moving on to the Highland View Van Pelt rezoning recommendation. As you can see, this change goes from 2nd Street all the way over to William Street. If you go to the next slide, again, that's 28 students, and this is what Van Pelt looks like now. On the next slide, go back again, Ms. Jones. You'll see that little corner at the very bottom of your screen. You watch it disappear as she clicks, click again, and that's the section that will go away from Van Pelt and go to Highland View. Next slide. So there's a before and after of what those attendance zones will look like. And there's Highland View currently, their attendance zone. And there's what it looked like. You'll notice the dot there at the bottom of the screen there, that you're very close to the Highland View area where that pin is marked. And so that neighborhood is closer to Highland View from the very beginning. Okay, the next slide, there's a before and after of what Highland View's attendance zone would look like.
Well, either slide would work. On the right-hand side, the area is down in the far right-hand corner. What's that?
That is the East Ridge Portsmouth area going over to Heartland.
So, I was going to say, I don't see streets, so
Yeah.
are those basically streets, or would that entail with just.
Yeah, it basically is with the Woodlands. The Woodlands neighborhood would stay with at Van Pelt, and everything to the west of Woodlands would go to Highland View, which basically ends up being Portsmouth and Harbor Landing, Dixie Street, a few Corporation Street, some streets in that area. Okay, next slide. So again, there's the area that we're discussing here, as you can see, at the very, right on the state line, as a matter of fact. And in total, that would encompass 43 students in grades, next year's grades, kindergarten through 5th. As you can see, the impact on Highland View is still class sizes are still very reasonable. Still at 4th grade, still only have 13 students per grade level, and with the highest being 21 students per class in 5th grade. But then when you look at the impact it would have on Van Pelt, as you know, we were, and Van Pelt, one of the differences is Van Pelt is so large that we have at least 3 teachers in every grade level there. And so, as you can see, that will greatly reduce the number of students in each classroom at Van Pelt. And finally, when you look at the average class sizes now, if this recommendation is approved, you can see that we will have a much more balanced class size across the division. And in some of our lower grades at Van Pelt last year, we had 23, 24 students. This recommendation will get that down into the low 20s, 21 and 22. And we had 13 and 14 students in some of our classes at Highland View and Washington Lee. And we are raising those numbers up some. So even though it's still not perfect, we do have a much more balanced class sizes if we follow through with this recommendation. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Well, I have several questions.
But one of the questions I have is on this impact on Van Pelt Elementary. Last year's enrollment, I'm seeing here at 405. Is that correct?
I don't have a calculator I can get.
Well, but then we have the additional students from Eastridge, the additional students from beyond Eastridge. That all totals up to 448. We were told the other day there were 475 students there, which is it?
Well, keep in mind we don't have pre-K numbers there.
We have 50 people in pre-K.
We have a large number of students in pre-K at Van Pelt. Mr. Rader, you're here. How many pre-K classrooms do we have? We have 2 pre-K classrooms. We also have some self-contained special ed classrooms at Van Pelt. And as you can see by looking at this, the kindergarten numbers are not complete either.
From last year, they're not complete?
Those numbers there will be just students enrolled in pre-K, not any new kindergarten students that were served in other areas. You can.
I think that one of the questions that's bothering me about this all along, as you all know well, is Van Pelt was originally built, I noted to house over 600 students. And that was intentional. We wanted to make it the biggest school so that we had the largest number of students. Originally there were 4 to 5, I've seen 5 classrooms in each pod. We're doing 3, but 4 is basically the way that was set up, to do four classrooms in each pod. I don't personally see, I understand the need for Stonewall Jackson with overcrowding, that's a perennial thing. I don't really see the need right here for, first of all, for Van Pelt Elementary right now, especially when we're looking at a new school. It also bothers me that what we're taking out of here are the low-income sections, racially and financially, socioeconomic, and we're moving in from our newest school to our oldest school.
Yeah.
And basically the most deprived neighborhood. I don't think anybody would want to live in that neighborhood if they didn't have to. And a lot of people have to. So I don't really understand picking on these people. Police lines, basically, we drew up our lines the last time on the different police zones. Election-wise, I don't think he's gonna be changing anything. And so we're gonna have people who are living in they're going to Van Pelt to vote, but they can't go to school here. They've gotta go to Kington or Tom Hill. Fire engines, if there's a fire somewhere, does that mean that the fire department, what about if they decide, well, we can't go there by Van Pelt?
Yeah.
They're gonna have to get the one from downtown.
Yeah.
We don't do that. Trash pickup, everything that the city does is done by these zones, but we're going in and we're separating these zones. And at a time like this, when we have all this pressure on Black Lives Matter and on equality and everything else, to take these two groups and put them into the oldest school that we have, from the newest school, to me, that's just wrong. And you guys can vote any way you want to vote on it, okay? That's my personal feeling, okay? That's just me personally.
Thank you. That's why you've been there so long. That's why you get right there.
Mr. White, just to clarify, I think when the 600 students were at Van Pelt, class sizes were much larger, and you can have class reduction numbers.
That's why I'm saying they can be larger by Van Pelt. We can put in 4.
Well, we are, Mr. Rader, I think,
Instead of 3 classrooms.
I think we do have pod with 5, and most of our pods do have the 4. There are a couple of examples where there's 3, I think. But we've even, if you, the other thing is, with trash service, fire service, none of those services will be affected by the changing of
Oh,
these
I know
numbers.
that's what I'm saying. They won't be, but we will be. We're affecting the school, but the other things won't be affected by that at all. I don't know, it's just,
We ready for a motion?
You still presenting?
Yeah, I'm answering questions.
We can do a motion and then do discussion.
I thought he was finished already.
I'm finished with my presentation. I don't have anything else to present.
No.
Okay. I beg your pardon, I stand corrected. You want me to repeat it?
Well, I'll make a motion to approve 2021
I'll second.
Any discussion?
One thing that hadn't been brought up in balancing out these numbers, we're doing a favor to the teacher. A lot of teachers have a lot more students than the Patriots over Washington League or Highland League. I think we need to consider the teachers' workload as we consider this money.
Did these figures also include special ed students coming from Van Pelt?
There, some of those numbers are going to be changed because if students are living in the zones that we're recommending rezoning and they're in a self-contained special education course, those students will remain at Van Pelt to receive those services. And if they have siblings, those students will also remain at Van Pelt too, so we don't split up families.
And when are we gonna know that?
It's already taken care of. Mr. Rader is aware of the students that live in that zone. If it doesn't get approved, Mr. Rader is aware of the students in that zone that would be, right.
Dr. Perigin.
What is the criteria for these particular spots?
So originally, this has been something we've discussed informally since I've been here. And we've avoided making a decision, even though we knew that it was a decision that needed to be considered because of the possibility of a new school. And so now, as we go into a situation where we know the ability for distance is going to be vitally important, whether it's the first day of school on August 20th or somewhere later in the fall whenever we're able to get all of our students back in our buildings, being able to provide social distancing is very important. So that's why it was brought back up. And knowing that we have self-tabled the opportunity to build a new elementary school, we know that we're 2, maybe 3 years away. So this balancing is not going to take care of itself. And so in knowing that we needed to make that recommendation, we actually looked, the Stonewall Jackson, Washington Lee was very easy. That used to be the boundary there anyway. That was, Commonwealth is a very good dividing line. And we also looked at moving at Woodlands, by moving the students that lived in Woodlands to Highland View's class sizes could not take that. And so if you'll remember, we looked at 2 possibilities, East Ridge or beyond East Ridge. And when we put all those numbers together and we've considered the number of students who will stay at Van Pelt because of the IEP needs that they have, it makes the most sense to recommend that East Ridge and beyond both are on there. And it's basically about location. All of the students that we're recommending to be rezoned will actually be closer to the neighborhood schools that they live in, to the schools in the neighborhood that they live in.
Buses and transportation, does that come into play for those?
Yes, and we've talked about our largest bus at the elementary school having over 70 students. That is the bus, and if Mr. Buckles is here, make sure I don't get this right. A little over 70 students ride the bus from the Woodlands, Harbor Landing, and East Ridge neighborhoods. And so by dividing those 2 neighborhoods, it will also help with the sizes, the number of students who ride on those buses, which transportation, regardless of how we open when we have students in person, transportation is going to be a big issue for us to deal with.
Dr. Burton, you mentioned Head Start. Have we got numbers from them since they're not open?
I know that we're working on pre-K and kindergarten enrollment. I'm sure that Ms. Hurt, and I don't know if she's with us on, there she is. Ms. Hurt, would you mind to talk about that just for a second?
So are you asking for numbers for this year or for this year? This year, of course, we're now from Head Start. It's not sure.
Ms. Hurt, could you come up here and hang out with me just for a second so everybody can hear you? Mr. Foster, ask that question again so Ms. Hurt can respond. She's our guru with pre-K and kindergarten.
Head Start is not, from my understanding, I could be wrong, but every time I go by there, I don't see anybody there. It's not currently open.
That is correct.
If Head Start doesn't open soon because of, I guess it's closed because of COVID, what does that do to our numbers?
Well, so currently Head Start is waiting on our decision and working with them to say we want to do what the school system is planning to do. So they plan to work alongside. If we start back, they want to do everything they can to start back. However, if Head Start was not to have a program this year, we would do all we could to expand our pre-K programs. We know we have child care in Bristol City that folks have to pay for, and those are options as well. But we would do all we could to try to serve as many pre-K children as we can.
Thank you, Mrs. Does that answer your question, Mr. Foster?
Numbers are my biggest question. I mean, Mr. White made some valid points. And no, seriously, you did, and I appreciate that. And we've talked about it before, about kids empowerment, because it is our own school. But this is probably the 3rd rezoning that I've gone through as a school board member, and I don't want to do it again. I know that. Building a new school is gonna stop all this. It's gonna correct everything. before we did this, and I got it wrong, I was the one who asked for parents to have these open sessions where parents would come in, especially the ones affected. Now, I didn't get to the Easter one, so, and I apologize for that. But since then, I've only been able to catch up with a couple of parents and speak with them personally. I've seen surveys. The surveys were saying that some are against it, but they'll do whatever it happens to make the system look good. Now, I don't know if that's right or not. That's just the surveys that I've seen. And I can only go with what I've got. I guess my question is, are we going to come back and be doing the same thing again next year if we don't get a new school, which we're not going to get? Or are we going to have the same conversation next year?
Mr. Foster, I can't tell you what's going to happen tonight, later, much less what the future is going to look like. I will tell you that because of a lot of reasons, one of those being the inability for landlords to evict. It looks like our numbers are going to be more stable this year as far as transiency as they've ever been, just based on preliminary conversations. There's probably other factors that go into that as well. But whether these numbers hold true, these numbers have held pretty true since I've been here, which is approaching 4 years. That we've had the low numbers in classes at Highview and Washington Lee, and we've been packed at Stonewall and Van Pelt. And that, basically I came about a year after the last rezoning. And so I think based on that information, I would say that this gets us in a pretty good spot. You mentioned the surveys. I don't know that we did an official survey, but after the last meeting, and I thought that the 12 o'clock meeting at Eastridge would be a good idea because we serve our meals at that time on that Wednesday. It was 90 degrees. It was a pretty hot day, but we did have actually better parent attendance at that meeting than we did at the 6 o'clock meeting, and we got some really good input. But even after that, I asked Mr. Rader and Dr. Riddle to contact everybody that lived in that zone who was affected. And as you talk about survey, it's probably their report of that information they received from those conversations. Yes, sir.
Well, like I said, I guess at the end of the day, it's going to be best across the system. There's going to be a couple of families that's going to be affected that, they're going to have heartburn over. But, if we're going to do it this year, we need to do it to make sure that we're straight across the board so we won't have to come back and tell these families next year we're going to have to move you right back again. That's my concern.
I got you. I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. If you're asking if we don't take action tonight, will we need to revisit this in the future? And I would think absolutely yes. Probably, if for no other reason, but the reason that Mr. Goodpasture mentioned is, we do have some inequity in class sizes, which does have an impact on teacher workload, teacher stress, and so forth.
Is the inequity mainly at Stonewall Jackson?
And it's in different grade levels. Kindergarten across the division last year was pretty large. We hope from an enrollment standpoint that we have large kindergarten numbers again this year. A lot of school divisions in Southwest Virginia are seeing declining enrollments. We've held pretty solid over the last couple of years. A lot of that because we've had small junior and senior classes, but large kindergarten classes. Hopefully that trend will continue.
Tyrone, you mentioned
There's only thing that I want to get through it with. One of the differences is that we've done it by streets before. We've never done it just by neighborhood. And that's what I think the whole uproar is right now. And when you came, we had just gone back to the rezoning after where we had rezoned before, which had caused all the trouble. So everybody was glad to get back into the original thing. But what really bothers me too tonight is to think that the Woodlands would have been included in this. If Highview had been bigger, that the Woodlands would have been included.
Not that it was bigger, it was more about class sizes and balancing class sizes.
And Woodlands would have been included.
Based on location, with a good arm, you can throw a rock from the Woodlands and hit Highview.
I was surprised that the Woodlands wasn't included. I still call it Springfield, but that would make it 3 impoverished neighborhoods for me to be able to school. I really hope that we're not looking at that on down the road. So,
I can tell you what I'm looking at down the road is building this 21st century learning environment for all of our elementary kids. That's my goal and continues to be my focus.
putting all the black kids and all the poor kids into
Let's hurry up and build a new school in that area so we can just be done with this conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. But I agree. It's not fair for our teachers. You know, if I was a hypothetical third grade teacher at one school and I had 5 kids and 5 years experience, and there's another teacher in another school with 5 years of experience in my same grade level that had 10 kids, I'd be upset too. So, I mean, this is something that probably needs to happen. Is it the right time to do it? What the teacher said, yes, but you know, whether COVID's out there or not, if we're gonna come right back and revisit it again next year, we might as well do it this year. And that was my question.
I got you. I'm sorry.
I just think, you know, the inequity, we talked about that. I mean, the same folks that are in here against doing this are the same folks who are against building schools, so we wouldn't have to do this. You know, they fought tooth and nail against the school, and this is the whole reason we wanted to do the school. I mean, it's the whole reason. A 21st century school, the school that were the inequities that we have in our school system would be lost. It would be a fair shake for everybody. And so we got the same folks now that are against it. And you know, our numbers are large at 2 schools, and our numbers are smaller at 2 other schools. And we need to make a change to do that. And, you know, when is the right time? If we don't do it now during COVID, when COVID's over next year, are the same folks that are saying don't do it, are they going to be gone because COVID's gone and say, oh, now's the time to do that? It's never going to be the right time. There's never the perfect time to make everybody happy. But something has to be done, and we need to do it now.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
No.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes.
Item 5E, approval of 2020-2021 school plan. Dr. Harris.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and members of our community, I am very proud in one position to share our Recover, Reimagine, Return, our plan for reopening schools in Bristol, Virginia Public Schools. Because I believe that we have a very complete and robust plan. It's not perfect, but I do think it's a very, very good plan. Over 80 pages of guidance about how we can do our best to safely reopen schools and to take care of the needs of our community, while also putting in mitigations to make our schools as safe as they could possibly be. This document is available on our website. I hope that you'll take time to review it. As a parent, as a teacher, as a staff member, as a school board member, this document is going to be what guides us over the next few months. If this plan is approved tonight, our intent is to share this with local churches, with local preschools, with local private schools, because the success and health of students across the city, whether they attend Bristol, Virginia Public Schools or they go to Children's Church on Sunday at ABC Church or what have you, the importance of providing a safe and healthy environment is paramount, and we want to share this great document, this great plan with other agencies in our community that provide child care services. So we will reach out to those that we know. If you know of somebody whose church or preschool or daycare center or even babysitting service could use this plan, let us know and we'll make sure to get their hands on it. It is readily available on our website. I don't know if the newest version, we made a couple of minor tweaks this afternoon, if it's on our website yet or not. If I send it to him again, I hope I send it to him, but if not, it is the most recent document that you'll see on Board Docs. So, without further ado, I'll go through the presentation. So, what has changed since July? Certainly a lot. What has changed, as a matter of fact, between 5 o'clock and 5:45 when I came in here, I think I changed this presentation 4 times. So if you reviewed this earlier and you see something new on there, just know that it's not because we're trying to pull a fast one on anybody, it's because the data continually changes. Since early March, when we first started getting updates, official updates about COVID-19, I truly feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose, and it has not stopped. I keep telling my wife that if we can just get past this, things are going to calm down and slow down, but as soon as I get that word out of my mouth, something new guidance, new situation arises. The last time that we were here, at the end of June, we had, I think, 4 total cases in the city of Bristol since the beginning of COVID-19. Today, there are 65 total cases in the city of Bristol. Now, when you look at that as a total population metric, that makes up about 1/3 of 1% of the total population of the city of Bristol. So even though 65 seems a lot more than 4, it certainly is not a significant percentage of the population. We have, since July, we've had 2 employees who have tested positive. Actually, we had 1 before that, so we've had 3 total since March. The bad news is that it's happened. The good news is we have had no spread related to any of those positives. So whether it be by grace, mercy, luck, or having a good plan in place, we have not had any spread despite the fact that we have had members of our staff who have tested positive. Additionally, we have also had a summer school session, and we've also, since late March, early April, have been providing childcare. And even in those situations where we've had students in our building, we've had no issues of transmission. Again, luck, mercy, grace, and a good plan, I think, played a part in that as well. Since June, we've also made changes to the mitigations and recover, reimagine, and return plan. There's an asterisk there because I will cover some of those here in just a moment. Survey results, we have put out another survey to our parents just to get them to share with us where they are now with whether they want to take advantage of in-person or remote learning. And we were, I think, about 62% before we saw the rise in cases in Bristol. But still, actually, if you looked at this presentation earlier, it was 58%. And Ms. Jones just, oh, there it comes back. But it changed. We had 5 or 6 more folks take it this afternoon. And so now 57% of our families tell us that if we're open in person, that they want their children to come. Now, if you just look at the numbers, a basic class size of 20, that means we're probably going to have 11 and a half children. I know you don't have half children, but between 11 and 12 kids in each of our classes if those numbers hold true. So we can social distance in most of our classes with 6 feet with 18 students. So when we get down to those numbers of 11 and 12, social distancing will have well more than 6 feet if these numbers hold true. So in lieu of that, though, I think it's unfair to call our plan a full in-person return to school. And so I recommend, as a matter of fact, throughout the rest of this presentation, I will call this the in-person hybrid model. And the previous hybrid model that we've discussed will become the alternating hybrid model. That would be the model where we have students come on A days and B days. We will call that the alternating hybrid model. And the plan as I'm presenting it tonight will be our in-person hybrid model. Also, since our last meeting, the CDC has joined the American Academy of Pediatrics in stressing the importance of an in-person return to school. At the same point in time, we're seeing dueling data about children being spreaders. Depends on which research study that you look at. Up until the recent weeks, you have heard that children are not spreaders of COVID-19. I would say if you've ever been in a kindergarten classroom, you would probably disagree with that, regardless of what the research says, because we know that many colds, flus, strep run through our schools like a rampage sometimes. There is some recent data that does say that children can be spreaders. You probably also saw a summer camp in Georgia. They had a significant outbreak of COVID-19. And then in Gwinnett County, Georgia, when teachers returned from in-service training, they also had several teachers who had to be quarantined because some employees were positive and because those other employees were engaged in close contact with them. However, if you look at other summer camps across America, the YMCA, for example, they've had high success rates in most situations, but when you look at what happened in the summer camp in Georgia, they didn't have a lot of success. So I think what it really boils down to are mitigations. Since our July meeting, Tennessee has released a traffic light model. If you apply that model to Bristol, Virginia currently, in the last 5 days we have moved into the red zone based on the model that they use. Sullivan County, Tennessee obviously is red, and Washington County, Virginia, their numbers are very similar to us. So if we want to look at yellow kind of being what we anticipate being the mode that we would want to open up in, green would be best. It's going to be a little while before we meet green by that standard. But for us to be dark yellow on August 12th, we would need to stay below 76 total cases. And so in the next 9 days, we have room to go up 11 cases over the next 9 days and still be in yellow. That's based on my projections using that formula. We could go, stay in light red and go up to 86 cases. As you probably know, Virginia has avoided the huge increases, the second surges that other states have experienced. However, this next bullet will come into play as we discuss our options later on. If you look at the UVA model, the UVA model predicts that Virginia will become a hot spot sometime in September. So even though we're seeing a local trend upward, Virginia overall is not seeing the upward trend that other states have. However, if you believe modeling, and there's all kinds of models out there, as a matter of fact, one model very early on said by this time in the summer, or as we go into school, 90% of all Americans will have contracted COVID. Obviously, that's not been the case, but it's still been a very significant spread. And so, looking at that UVA modeling, is it a good idea to push back our start date for school? I wish I had the answer. I certainly wouldn't be here tonight if I could answer some of the questions that all of us have. We've also revised some employee supports. We've received new guidance from the Department of Labor and Industry for our role as an employer. One of the questions that was asked in public comment earlier is what are the specifics of our ventilation plan? And the standards that have been brought out, Virginia is the first state in the nation. The nation doesn't even have these standards, but our ventilation system does meet the standards that are set forth in all of our buildings. There are some isolated areas where our ventilation is not as good. We already have put air scrubbers in those areas. We've also purchased new air scrubbers to put in some other areas throughout the school where we didn't have them last year. And we've also asked our teachers if they have concerns about ventilation in one of their work areas to let us know. We'll also provide additional ventilation or air scrubbers there as well. In addition to that, we have also increased the quality, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. That's out of my area of expertise. But in our filters, the filters that we're using a higher quality filter to also help with ventilation as well. So hopefully that answered the questions that you have. I can connect you with Mr. Buckles, our Director of Facilities and Logistics, and he can answer specific questions that you may have. And we want to do that because we want everybody to have a full understanding of exactly what it is that we're providing. Our employees will be trained. We've offered some counseling support and assistance for our employees. We have the Employee Assistance Program through Blue Cross Blue Shield. We've also reached out to Hines Community Services, and they're willing to provide services to our teachers who are dealing with a lot of stress as they ponder the possibilities of opening. And we also put out information about calling not a hotline, but a warm line. And we've got that information out to our employees as well as far as providing mental health services to our employees. Our employees will be trained for COVID-19 avoidance and mitigation. We won't be doing much training normally like we normally do when we come back to school. We want our teachers to spend that time in the classrooms and getting to know parents and families, but we will have to do some COVID-related training with our employees. Some of our employees who pay close attention to all the lines on their paycheck notice this last paycheck that they have 10 COVID emergency leave days that have been added there. So any employee who is dealing with a COVID issue have 10 days that don't count against their personal leave, don't count against their sick leave days. They have 10 days that are granted. And hopefully nobody has to use those. We did have some employees that use those over the summer. And I'm sure that we'll probably have employees that use those as we go into the fall, but those days are there for their protection. And if this is not a promise that no matter what you say that we're gonna, our goal is to be flexible. If somebody uses all 10 of their emergency leave days, they don't have other sick or personal leave days that they can use. We want to provide flexible solutions in case additional days are needed. And some of those solutions may include a teacher teaching virtually, just like our students are receiving instruction virtually. That's just one example. But we can look at changing job responsibilities and descriptions if someone exhausts their COVID-19 related emergency leave and receive things. So, what this decision I think boils down to is no matter what decision our board makes tonight, we take on a certain amount of risk. Our job is to mitigate as much risk as possible, but also to have a balanced view of risk. I think what's paramount on everyone's mind is COVID-19 and the risk associated with that illness. However, as we think about our students, there are other risks if we don't come back to school. School nutrition, for example. I'm proud to stand before everybody tonight, as Ms. Hicks may be with us online. And Mr. Buckles, I think, is here too, in transportation. We served over 158,000 meals to our community since March. That is that means about 1,000 students a day were receiving free meals. Well, guess what? We have 2,100 students. 75% of those families qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So we know, even though we served 158,000 meals, 25% of our families who needed meals didn't get them. And what we delivered, we took them to people's homes. We had pickups in various locations, but 25% of our families who needed meal assistance this past summer didn't get it. If schools don't open, that's going to continue to be an issue for a fourth of our student body. We know that child care, it's not our job to be a child care center, but many parents use us as child care while they go to work. If we don't open schools in a way that allows parents to make the choice to come to school in person, many parents, or some parents at least, could lose their job. As far as essential services go, my biggest concern, if we were to go to a fully virtual school option, many of our students who receive special education services, we would be inadequately able to provide and serve those students and their needs. And as far as, people talk, well, you can do this, you're going to get sued. Well, you know what? Our chances are much greater to be sued for not meeting the requirements and the needs of a student with an IEP than they are to get sued because of any of these other issues. There is not a question in my mind, if we don't open in some version in person, our ability to serve the needs of our special populations will be greatly reduced. One other thing that we know across the state, 25% of all child abuse reports come from schools. In the last 5 months, there have been 0 child abuse and neglect reports from Bristol, Virginia public schools. There's no doubt in my mind that some of our students have suffered through abuse and neglect during that time. And our teachers and our principals and our cafeteria staff and our custodians, our school resource officers, nobody has been able to advocate for those families, for those children who are going through that. If we don't open school in some version in person, that will only continue. The social emotional impact, many of our students receive behavioral health services and other mental health services in our schools. Some of our students have not received those services for 5 months. If we don't allow some option for parents to make a choice to come back to school in person, we have that risk as well. And then finally, you've heard me say it, the summer slide is one thing, but the COVID crash is something completely different. We know that online learning is inferior to in-person learning. There's no question about that. We know that there are going to be huge gaps in learning when our students come back to us. If we have to extend for a few more months our virtual learning program, we'll do our very best. I assure you, our staff is top-notch. I wouldn't work with any other staff. I'm proud to work at Bristol Virginia Public Schools. Our teachers get it done. But we've asked them this past spring to do the impossible. And they make the impossible work sometimes. But you can't be perfect. Nobody's perfect. Our teachers are not perfect, as hard as they try. And if we don't provide an opportunity for our students to get back and build those relationships with teachers in person, and for our teachers to see those aha moments and the light bulb clicking, or hear that grunt when they see that sigh when the student is experiencing frustration, we're going to continue to see more loss of learning. And so, I feel the burden of making a decision about bringing us back to school. It weighs heavy on my heart. And I'll tell you that these other decisions, this other risk that we deal with, weigh heavy as well. And so as I present this plan tonight, just know that it's not me without thought and anguish and soul searching that I make the recommendation that I do. Because our students need us, not just from a health standpoint, they need us in every aspect of their life. So, as we talk about balancing risk, you may have saw last week that a group of Kingsport pediatricians, even though COVID-19 is raging red hot in Sullivan County, wrote a letter to the Board of Education there saying that it's in students' best interest to reopen for many of the same reasons that I just shared with you. So we take that guidance, and then you lay it against our own experience. I know that we've had 3 staff members who've contracted COVID-19. I know that we've had a small number of our students who have also contracted COVID-19. So you take the advice that you're getting from experts like local pediatricians, like the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and you weigh that against your own experience. People that we know and love that are fellow Bearcats who have gone through this. And so it's a terribly troubling decision, a recommendation that I have to make tonight. But again, it goes back to balancing risk. What risk are we willing to take to make sure that we serve our students? Because that's what we're here to do. We're not here to be doctors. We're not here to be nurses. We have to fill those roles sometimes. We're here to educate and take care of the social, emotional, and educational needs of our students. And so the recommendation I make tonight takes all of that into consideration. So, based on the changes that we've experienced since July, we have also, in our Recover, Reimagine, Return plan, have changed our mitigations. Face coverings are required for all students grades 3 and above. Now, there's a reason that we didn't keep our lower grade students in there. We actually, at one point in time, early on in this process, had used students aged 10 and above. That's because the governor of Virginia recommended that was the age to use. And if you talk to medical professionals, they believe that with younger children, and you probably noticed me, I fidgeted and messed with my mask multiple times. The risk of younger students touching their mask and then touching their eyes or pulling their mask off and touching their face, that puts them at greater risk of contracting COVID-19 than not to have a mask on at all. And so none of the decisions that we made have been made without thought and without guidance from health experts. You may disagree with this, but I'm going to say it. I'm an expert on curriculum and instruction. I'm not an expert on health measures. So when we need advice from health experts, we go there. And that's what the health expert says. Now, keep in mind, if we go into a low red, we have to make a decision. Am I against requiring that all students grades pre-K through 2 also have the requirement to wear face masks? I'm absolutely not against it. Am I against adding an additional mitigation for all of our teachers to wear face shields? Absolutely not. I want to do what it takes that where we can open in a safe environment as possible and mitigate the other risks so that we can serve our children. Even though we're not requiring those younger students to wear masks, we are strongly encouraging it, and our teachers are really good motivators. And I'm sure if there's a will, there's a way, and they will make sure if there's a way to get those students to keep those masks on, they will certainly do that. The mask also must be worn in classes where 6 feet of social distancing cannot be maintained. They must be worn during temperature checks, and they must be worn during transitions. Staff, we also are encouraging staff to schedule creative and safe ways to provide face covering breaks. I just kind of pulled that off myself because I'm getting a little hot here underneath my mask, and so I pulled it off as an illustration. But I think we could all use face covering breaks, and I know that our teachers will come up with creative ways to make that happen. And we have also purchased additional air scrubbers. I mentioned that earlier as well. So what solutions do we have for opening school? First of all, our first option is just to approve the plan as it's already been presented, which is we're calling now the in-person hybrid plan. We could also increase mitigations. I just mentioned a few ways that we could increase mitigations, and we can implement this very same plan. We can adjust our school start date, move it back, and implement the plan as presented, or we can do the same thing and increase those mitigations as I just mentioned. We could always come to school on August 20th as scheduled in person for everybody that wants to, develop those initial relationships, set those expectations, and then the following Monday do fully remote for all students. On August 20th, we could come in with the alternating hybrid model, the AABB model. Or we could come in fully remote on August 20th. Never bring our students in at all and just have everybody start the school year fully remote. And then finally, we could also adjust the school start date. There's a lot of options, as you can see, and open school in either an alternating hybrid or a fully remote model. So we have a lot of solutions. I don't know that any of those are perfect. A lot of those will work. Some of those are better. Some of those are worse. But we do have, it's not like we're pigeonholed or that we're in a corner and we're having to fight our way out. We have lots of options and lots of solutions. So, in order to make that decision, we want to do it with data. We have already been told, not by anybody here in Bristol, but the state superintendent who is directing and leading this process across the Commonwealth, go ahead and get ready. Be flexible, be agile. Know that you may, every Thursday, you may have to tell people that live in your community what learning model you'll be following the next week. We're not at that point yet, but we very well get that. We might start the year in person. We might go fully virtual. We may come back in a hybrid, go back fully remote before we can ever make it back fully in person. We've been warned that very well may happen. The same has been true for the state health department. We need to be ready and able, and we're ready. If we have to start school tomorrow, well, not really, because we gave teachers for August 20th to get all the lessons done. But if we're ready to go fully remote, we're ready to go fully in person, and we're ready to go if we're in a hybrid model. We have to make a few adjustments here and there, but we're ready. Our team has been phenomenal. But as we make those decisions, we don't want to be arbitrary in making those decisions. So we're going to look at a lot of different data metrics. We anticipate a metric will be provided by the Virginia Department of Health. It was debuted to us last Tuesday. However, I think its debut was not very well received. And so I think that they are reworking the state dashboard. I'll just tell you one thing about that state dashboard as it was presented. We're making decisions, trying to make decisions on a local basis based on our local health metrics. Well, the region that they assigned us to was Southwest Virginia. That makes sense. However, Southwest Virginia extended all the way to Augusta County. I don't know how familiar you are with the state of Virginia, but that's about a 6-hour drive from Lee County. It didn't make a lot of sense. And so you'll see I don't give that a lot of weight as we're making a decision. Hopefully, we can get that same information from the dashboard by zip code though. and that's what remains to be seen. I've worked with the Mount Rogers Health Department to create a model that's like the Tennessee traffic light for Bristol. That model focuses on the 14-day average of new positives, but it breaks it up to 100,000 person population. And so for us in Bristol, every time that we have a new case of COVID, when it's applied to this model, it's like we've had over 5 cases as you compare it to 100,000 people. So every time, it's hard for our numbers to go down, because even if we just have one new case, it's like we've gotten 5.5 new cases. And so it's great to be small, because we can be agile and we can make things happen in small communities. You can't make it happen in large communities. But this is a disadvantage, because every positive case we have has such a large impact. But that's the data that we have. We're also tracking that same metric for Washington County and our health district as a whole, which goes all the way from Bland down to Bristol. Now, we are taking Grayson, Galax, and Carroll County out. You may or may not be familiar. They've had some outbreaks in nursing homes there, and actually Galax is one of the hottest spots, according to data, in the entire United States. They have almost 400 cases and only 6,000 people that live in the city. And so we're looking at our health district as a whole, so that'll be Bland, Wyeth, Smith, Washington, Bristol, and seeing how they fare on the red light, green light, yellow light metric. We are also tracking our percent positive rates for Bristol, Washington County, and Sullivan County, and other divisions as well. Most divisions in our area remain at about 1/3 of 1%. If you look at Northern Virginia and the higher populated areas like Richmond, you'll see that their percent positive rates are in excess of 1 full percent. So even though going from 4 to 65 feels like a huge jump, when you look at the total impact on our overall population, it's nowhere close to the areas that are choosing to go fully virtual. We are also tracking hospitalizations and deaths in Bristol. We think that's an important piece of information. If people are testing positive, how is it affecting them from a health standpoint? We're also tracking the number of outbreaks in Bristol. We're tracking the number of positive cases in school-aged children in Bristol. And then this was one of the additions that I made right before we came in here today. Williamson County, Tennessee, now is considering active cases divided by total population. And if you look at, and so their metric would be that if you're not just your total cases, but the number of positive cases in your community, if it exceeds 1% of the total population, that puts you into the red. And in between 0.5 and 1%, that puts you into yellow. And if you're below 0.5, you would be completely green, fully in-person reopening. If you look at that metric just in isolation, we could start fully in person tomorrow in Bristol, because we're sitting at 0.35 or 0.37, not even 0.5% of our population in total cases. If you looked at our active cases, that number's even smaller. So we'll consider all of these data points along with student and staff data in real time. We'll be looking at absent rates in schools. We'll be looking at positive cases in schools. We'll be looking at substitute teacher availability, and on and on and on. So we're not just going to look at community data. We're going to look at how the data really impacts the day-to-day work that we're doing in our buildings. That will also go into it. So all of this data will go in, and I currently, unless something changes, this is how I will be weighting this information as I make recommendations. Bristol, obviously, that'll be weighted higher than any other locality. Washington County, which completely surrounds us, will be weighted next. Our health district as a whole will be weighted next. And then Sullivan County, Tennessee, even though we're neighbors with Sullivan County, I didn't rate it as high because the way they measure metrics in Tennessee is different than how they measure metrics in Virginia. So that data, even though it's close to us and it should be weighted, it's not weighted as much because it's not the same data that we're experiencing in Virginia. And then I'll look at Southwest Virginia as a whole, and currently the state dashboard that's supposed to come out will be rated the lowest. Hopefully they'll make improvements in that, and we can use that state dashboard as a strong indicator of how we should continue in our school instructional delivery. In addition to that, we'll also take into account extenuating circumstances. For example, if a long-term care facility in the city of Bristol, Virginia has an outbreak, that has very little impact on what we're doing in our schools. So we'll take that into consideration as well. So if you look at the red light, the traffic light model in Tennessee, here's what the data looks like. You'll see there in yellow, that is the new cases, actual number of new cases that we've had in the city of Bristol over the last 14 days. That blue line, the blue bar, is the number of cases that counts towards the 100,000 population. So as you can see, on July 31st, we had 7 cases. That's been our highest daily total yet. That translates into 40 cases as you try to compare that and take it out of isolation. And then if you look at that trend line, we just went over 15. As you can see, 7 days ago, we were still down in the yellow level. So the number of cases we've had over the last few days has certainly made that number rise. And that 7 is going to be hard to recover from because it's really like 40 cases. So as we're looking at data over the next few days, our number is still going to be up there above 10, but it's mainly because we had one day of 7. Today we had an increase of 2. The average over the last 10 days has been 3.1 cases over the last 10 days. So there's a lot. We can't look at any of this data in isolation. It has to all be looked at as a collection of information. And I'll be using every piece of that information as we make a decision, as I make a recommendation to open school, and then also as we make decisions to keep school open and what that looks like. So just to give you an idea, going back to that BDH metrics, again, Southwest Virginia goes all the way to Augusta County. Some countries are not that large. But anyway, these are the metrics that they're considering in that dashboard. That ED there is emergency departments and emergency room. But anyway, if you look at that, you'll see that is some of the same data that we're considering on a local level. And so that gives me a little comfort to know that we're at least looking at the right metrics. So, what are those metrics going to look like? Here's day 1. From this point forward, we're tracking this data. And as you can see, tomorrow we'll have August the 4th on there. And over the next 9 days, 10 days, we will look at each of these data. Currently, we have 65 total cases in Bristol. That is an infection rate of 0.37% of 1%. So not even a half of 1% of the total population of Bristol has been infected. Our traffic number, red, green, and yellow, our traffic light number is 16.9. Washington County's number will be similar. Mount Rogers traffic numbers, so if you take Bland, Smith, Wythe, Washington, Bristol, look at all of those divisions, that traffic number is still in yellow at 10.3. The trend, today we had 43 new cases in Southwest Virginia. We'll continue to track that trend, and that's as reported by WCYB and WJHL. Sullivan County's traffic number today is 17.73. Sullivan County has the opposite problem. Each one of their new cases counts as less than 1 because their population is about 158,000 people in all of Sullivan County. Total Bristol cases of students, school-aged children, less than 5 at this point. I'm not giving any numbers because when you start dealing with numbers that small, you can identify people without meaning to identify people. But the total number of cases of school-aged children in the city of Bristol is less than 5. We have had 1 outbreak. If you watch the news, you probably know where that outbreak happened, here in the city of Bristol, right across the street. We have had 6 hospitalizations out of those 65 cases. We've had 0 deaths. In Washington County, there have been 19 hospitalizations out of about 180 total cases and 4 deaths. And then when we talk about estimated active cases, Virginia does not report on recoveries. Mr. McGee has tried to make that happen in conversations with the governor and other various officials at the state level. But we do not report recoveries, so we really don't have an idea of what the active cases are. However, many divisions are using The number of cases over the last 10 days, and I think that they come about that is because typically it's a 14-day incubation period, and then whenever you take the amount of time it takes to get testing done, we had one of our employees who tested, took over 20 days to get the results back, so they were well past the 14 days. And so they're using the total of the last 10 days as their active case number. If we were to use that, as I told you earlier, our average is 3.1 over the last 10 days, so in Bristol, we would currently have 31 cases. 31 cases, and that would take us to about less than a fifth of 1 percentage point of active cases based on our population. So as you can see, in some areas we're red and some areas we're green, and you compare us to other localities, and there's a lot of information to look at, and we're going to look at every bit of this as we make that decision. So, how does that work? You know, if we're fully green, if we're completely green, we're pre-March 13th. Everybody that can come to the building will be in the building. As we get less green, then we start to increase mitigations. If you'll notice at the top, mitigation starts out small and it gets bigger as it goes across. So as we go from green to yellow to red, the amount of mitigations that we do will also increase. But if you look at the bottom and you see building occupancy, as we go from green to red, as things get worse, the amount of folks that we allow into our buildings will also decrease. And so if we're between green and yellow, we could very much be 100% in person as long as we had the right mitigations in place. If we were between yellow and red, or dark yellow or light red, we could be reduced in person. However, if we get to full tilt boogie dark red, then at that point we're probably fully remote. Let me remind you too that unless we get just completely out of hand in the deepness of the color of red, we still can provide in-person instruction to small groups of students. That could be a student with a severe disability. It could be a student with an English language learner. It could be a student who's in career technical education that needs the hands-on experience working on a car that they can't get by virtual learning. But that would be in small numbers, and we would have to get variance approval from the state. So that's what it's going to look like as we go through this green, yellow, and red spectrum. Now, we won't just be using the traffic light numbers to determine what's green, yellow, and red. We'll be using all the metrics that I mentioned there earlier. So as you look at how that plays out across the Commonwealth, the red counties that you see here, those are school divisions who have not decided how they're going to return to school. The blue school divisions, as you can see, those are in the higher populated areas of the Commonwealth. Those school divisions have already decided they're coming back 100% virtual. And then the remainder of the state, which is primarily rural areas across the Commonwealth, those are school divisions that are coming back in some form of hybrid. It may be an A-Day, B-Day. It may be our coming back in a hybrid model. Here's something important. You see all the yellow. It's probably twice as much as the blue. However, the bulk of the population in Virginia live in those blue counties. And so it makes sense that the more condensed the population centers are, the larger the need for remote learning is. And I think that's, this is actually put out by a BEA representative who actually went to the House of Delegates, Tim Hickson. Anyway, he has a website. I'll send that link to you if you'd like to. There's got some more information there as well. So here's my recommendation. It took a long time to get here, and I apologize. I think everything that we talked about is very important. I recommend that we approve the current plan, our 3R document, with the increased face covering requirements that we've added since the July meeting, and that would be with an in-person hybrid model with parent choice, and Fridays being virtual for most students. However, if a student needed additional assistance, they needed enrichment, or if the parent just couldn't provide child care, those students could come to school or work with one of our outside agency partnerships. Now that's my recommendation, that we open in-person, hybrid model, about 57% of our students coming in person. If the health metrics continue to decline, an adjustment could be made on August 12th by me with board input. The reason I recommend the date of August 12th, currently teachers are scheduled to come back on August the 13th. If we push that decision date back to August the 12th, teachers would not have to get child care because they know that they're going to have to come to work. They just would not need child care if we were to push it back on August the 12th. It also gives parents more than a week to make arrangements for whatever changes that we have. However, I think we're setting in motion the potential changes that we could have. The first alternative would be an in-person hybrid with additional mitigations. And so if we see an increase in cases, we see an increase in our color, but we still think that we can go safely to school based on the recommendations and guidance we receive from health officials, we would add additional mitigations such as all staff wearing face shields, all staff wearing gowns, all students, regardless of age, being required to wear face coverings. Those are some additional mitigations that we can put into place. The second alternative would be a rolling start for that in-person hybrid model. So we look at August 12th and things still aren't looking good. We can push our start date off to August 24th and hope that over the next few days after that, things got better. We could reconsider it again a week later and look at starting on August 31st. And if things still don't look good, make a final decision for September the 8th. Now, that does not provide a whole lot of certainty to families and teachers, but it does give us an opportunity to open in a way that we think best serves our children.
My battery's
The
at
third option,
70%.
I mentioned this earlier, would be an in-person
Battery's at
day one,
70%.
and then follow the appropriate alternative after that. It could be an alternating hybrid or fully remote. And then finally, we can just go ahead and make a decision tonight, or we can make it on August 12th either, to not
I'm
do
at
any of those
7%.
things. Go ahead and start school on August 20th, but start an alternating hybrid or a fully remote model. And so again, my recommendation is that you approve this plan with increased face covering requirements, the in-person hybrid model that gives parents a choice. We revisit that on August 12th. If our health metrics stay the same, we continue. If our health metrics get worse, we adjust according to how much worse those metrics get between now and then. We have additional alternatives if that's not the direction the board chooses to go. And then finally, I'll just end with this. When you look at the big picture, we're not just talking about COVID-19. We're talking about the COVID crash. We're talking about the needs of students with IEPs. We're talking about children in our community who we know are being abused and neglected. We're talking about 25% of our student population who we know did not get their food needs met this summer. We're talking about families who may have to, parents who may have to quit their jobs, or grandparents who may have to quit their jobs to provide child care. We're talking about a lot of different factors as we make this decision. If I could have chosen whether or not I had to make this decision, I could have laid it at someone else's feet. I may or may not have done so. It certainly would have been easier. But I believe that decisions about how we reopen school, when we reopen school, ought to be made here in Bristol and not be made in Richmond. We have the data that we need to make educated decisions. We have the variances that we need to work with teachers. We've got some teachers that are going to be working with us in a virtual mode this year because of some health concerns. We're happy to work with those. We've surveyed our staff. We only know of 3 staff members total who are concerned about coming back if we come back. Now, I know that there are concerns, but I'm saying when we asked them to contact the principal or human resources about whether they would come back under the current plan, if they had health concerns or other factors, we've only heard from 3. Now, obviously, I'm not blinded that I don't think that people have concerns. I have concerns. It weighs very heavily on me. I know our teachers and our staff members do as well. But currently, we believe that we, following this model, as long as our health metrics do not decline, that we can fully staff and provide the education that our students need and deserve. So, with that, I will open it up to any questions that the board may have. Mr. Fletcher.
Thank you, Dr. Parrish. For discussion, I think we need to have a motion.
I've got someone bringing a charger. Okay. Because we're about to go out.
I make a motion that we
Discussion.
Dr. Murray,
Yes, sir.
I appreciate the hard work that you've done, and staff and committee and everybody who's come up with this plan. And I can tell by your passion, just from the presentation, listening to you. So I appreciate that. But as it says there in the big picture, COVID-19 continues to change on a daily basis. Numbers could go up one day, and back down the next day. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. But I've got kids in the system, and I've got grandkids in the system. I'm not as young as I used to be, so the concern would be to bring it back and give it to me. But I have enough to do it across the street, as you see. My point is, and everybody that knows me would know that I would give due diligence because I've done it since 2008. Instead of it being an alternative, why don't we wait? Thank you. September 8th, and make it this new picture. To come back. Full speed or whatever, this, what you just presented. I know you probably tell me that the University of Virginia says that, and I'll probably get in trouble. But what I get ready to say. But since I'm a Tennessee volunteer fan, I'm gonna say it anyway. You know, the University of Virginia is in Charlottesville. That's 3.5 hours, depending on how fast you drive. And if you were to tell me that Mount Rogers or somebody close said that that's what's gonna happen then, I could just say that. But I'm thinking with vacation, winding down again over, maybe we can just push back, get an opportunity to see if this settles down, and then we'll get it again, and go and set a start date for September 8th. That will help teachers and parents with child care or whatever they need to do, that they'll already have it done by the time they get ready to do it. That's just my opinion. And like I said, I wouldn't give myself or anybody else support in this effort, due diligence, if I didn't push one after the Labor Day started. And if we don't do it now, I don't know when we'll be able to do it.
Mr. Foster, I think you have a great point. I wish I had a perfect answer. I see a lot of benefits for that if things go right. I see some negative things if things don't go right. You mentioned the one concern, we could get into a deeper hot spot by pushing it back later. It's very possible. The other thing too is that by pushing that start date back without seeing where the conditions go, we could arbitrarily be doing that and things could get so much better. And then we extend our school year well into June of next year, which also has an impact as well. That's not trying to pick an argument or anything like that. It's just the impact of making that decision.
And I'm not looking for the argument over it. I'm just saying there's things other that we probably could look at and, you know, fall break. There's another break that we take 2 days. When I went to school, there was no such thing as a fall break or whatever they call this other break. Of course, I don't vote on the calendar every year because it doesn't start after Labor Day. But the point is, I mean, you know, there was stuff up there from pediatricians from Kingsport. That's fine. I mean, they're in the Tri-Cities, but I live in Bristol. And like I said, I want to hear from Mount Rogers. If you push back to that Labor Day, let's see what Bristol, Tennessee, what they've done. Let's see what Washington County, what they've done. There are other places around us, but those are the ones that are so close to us that directly affect us. And in the long run, if we do have the numbers where we can get kids to come in for those areas as adult zone students. That's where we've been getting them from. But that's just me.
I certainly understand your point, and the only thing that I would change about that recommendation is that if the board does decide to do that, move to a Labor Day start, post-Labor Day start, that we not do it tonight, that we at least see what the metrics are 9 days from now on August 12th. That would just be an addendum to your recommendation, not that I have the authority to do that.
I think that's a great idea, both of you. I think that that's a good idea to start after the 20th. See what happens, if the numbers are going up, see what happens in Tennessee, see what happens in Washington County, all around here, and throughout the state. I'm worried, I don't think the numbers are going to drop. I hope I'm wrong. But I agree with what you're saying about that. And last year was just blowing away. I mean, we just basically threw the year out the window. And it's not going to bother me to see us spend a little more time in school this year, knowing that we erred on the side of safety. I agree with what you said, that we need to come in and we need to talk about this when we make this decision later.
But I agree that the plan is good. I'm not sure about the face mask at whatever grade level. I don't know how that's gonna be taken into consideration. But like I said, if we just push it back and just push it back and look at it. Because we need to be in school. Our kids need to be in school. They need to have relationships with their teachers.
Yes.
I just don't know when the right time is.
Ms. Hicks is going to, I was supposed to say this in the presentation, keep in mind, we cannot serve meals again until the first day of school. So if we do move it back to September the 8th, we cannot serve another meal until September 8th. That's just another factor to consider. Our summer lunch program, our summer feeding program is over, and the next meal that we can serve will be on our first day of school.
Like I said,
over in person.
right. Well, like I said, we've already witnessed some of the remote part things, how much of a nightmare that would be. Like I said, we need to be in school in person, just when it's the right time to do it.
If we started virtually first and then went to the actual classroom, then would that count as having started school and start serving meals then?
Yes, sir.
I like the idea of starting after Labor Day. That's the way it should have been done all along. But we're in a different age right now. We have a student population that's at risk as we speak. And the quicker we can get them into school, the lower the risk will be for that population. And we know that COVID has been getting more apparent in this town since March. We started out with one case, now we have
65.
And I don't see that trend reversing anytime soon. And now's the time. This is as safe as it's going to be for the number of cases. And it gives us a chance to get our sea legs, so to speak, get our balance, find out what's going on. And then, if the risk and the safety is compromised to the point that we're in the red zone, we've got different alternatives to go to. And it just saddens me to think that we've got 75% of our student population that depends on us feeding them to some degree. And missing a meal from now until September, that's bad stewardship on our part. We not only have to educate our children, but we have to feed them, we have to protect them, we have to counsel them, we have all kinds of different duties that are attendant to public education. And I don't think that anybody in the our school system provides is just a basic component for people going to work. And we have a huge responsibility as a board to do what's best for our children. And I thought all along that getting them back in the classroom with the fact that they don't transmit the disease, they don't catch it nearly like the rest of the population does. Those are the things that we need to consider as being the safest for our children, is in classroom learning, and it's the best way for education. We know it's demonstrable that the online is a failure for the broad range of students. Now, there are some students who can get by online because their parents are going to take care of the communication and tutor them as they go along. But a lot of students, they don't have the parent backup that they need to make online successful. So I'd like to see us go forward as soon as possible.
Well, I'll just say, you know, I agree with Mr. Goodmaster, that our students need to be back in the classroom. My biggest thing about starting after Labor Day is supposedly UVA model is right. The biggest thing about being in person is establishing those relationships. You know, that's been my whole thing all along. It was easy to end up virtual because the relationships were already made. The school year was about over. But it's about relationships starting the school year. I mean, you know, our students need to see our teachers, our teachers need to see our students. And to start out virtual, I just don't know how to transition into that going forward. You know, if the numbers don't change and we're still at a good, you know, at a good level, to start off August 20th, I think that's what we need to do. Because you look at it, you know, if it gets worse by Labor Day, then you know you've had 2.5 weeks of in-person relationship building, being just 2 weeks. That's better than none. You know, if we have to go remote after that, or even do a hybrid AABB after that, I think it's more easy. It's easier to transition into that after we've started as soon as we possibly could. So that'd be my thoughts.
Well, my feeling is we probably should have been in school the last couple of months. I hate we kind of missed that. If it was really up to me, I'd say we start school sooner than August 24th. But we can't do that. We've got plans in place to be flexible, to constantly monitor the COVID situation around us daily. I feel for just like Mr. Goodmaster, the 75% of the students that we do more than just teach. And we're in the business to provide public education, and we need to do the best we possibly can. And I think we need to try. If we go on for a couple of weeks and things get bad, then we've got plans in place to back up and do some remote learning or virtual, whatever. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think there's any data out there across the country that it's good at all. It's an actual fail. Find that from many sources. But I'm in favor of getting started as soon as we possibly can, personally. I think we have to try it. And I feel like we've got as good a plan as anyone in the state to do so. I don't want to put anybody at risk, teachers, students. I'm at risk every day. We all are. But we just have to try to minimize the risk. And I think that's what our plan is.
all the conversations tonight, I'm not sure if it means, we also have some of those mitigating factors on display there. If anybody has questions about the mitigations that we have in place, we're happy to answer those. And, anyway, I'm probably failed to mention that, but several of our mitigations are on display. They probably have your temperature taken as you came in the room. Again, the CDC recently said that they don't recommend testing or taking the temperature of every student they come in with. So maybe next week it will change again.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
No.
Mr. Goodpaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher, without overstepping my bounds, I think we're new item 6F, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yes, the item that was in the consent agenda.
The question I had, what's the rationale for this? Is the old one the one that's underlined?
If you go down to the bottom, currently, teachers, staff members, employees of any nature, even if they have leave available, they can take leave without pay and save their leave up. That's not consistent with best practices or with other division policy manuals. I'm not sure how that came to be, but it has become an issue. And so all we're saying is employees can take leave without pay, but they need to exhaust the leave that we give them first before they take leave without pay.
So this has become an issue?
Not a widespread issue, but an issue in a couple of departments. And anyway, and I was unaware that that was even a policy until it was brought to my attention. That's not normal practice. I mean, I'm sure there's places that you can do that, but it's not typical. If you have leave, you take it, and then if you run out of leave, you get approval for leave without pay.
I wondered because usually these things we approve them from the ESBA.
This is a regulation.
And I saw we've done this on the 19th and the 20th, or in 2019. Yeah, I just wonder what the rationale was for that.
That was it, and again, this is a regulation and not a VSBA policy. Typically, regulations, the superintendent just does those and notifies you. But any time that a regulation has substance such as this nature, we want to make sure that you're aware of it.
We need a motion on that?
Yes, sir. And again, if you want more time, we don't have to discuss it tonight. We're meeting on the 17th. We can bring that back up with the policies on the 17th as well, in case anybody wants to do further research.
You say it's a regulation, does that mean we have no choice?
No, sir. It just means if you don't approve it, I can come right behind you and approve it. That probably wouldn't be wise on my part. What you don't have a choice about are the VSBA policies. They get us in line with state law. Regulations, I typically approve those in office. Sometimes I bring a regulation like this and we want to discuss it right after this to the board because I probably ought to get your permission rather than your forgiveness. And I'm smiling.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like the motion to approve the approval of a GCBD-R1 staff leave and absence regulation.
Second.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alvis,
Yes.
Mr. Foster,
Yes.
Mr. Goodpaster,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes. Okay, next item. Item 6, discussion of regulation IKF R2, determining class rank classes of 2019, 2020, and 2021.
Yes, sir. Mr. Fletcher, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Class rank is another one of those regulations. This is a housekeeping matter. Does not change our practice. If anybody's been on the board either this decade or in the previous decade, you probably had issues with class rank and how that's determined. Currently, the way that we implement this policy is students get to count the 8 classes that they're in towards class rank, and then we're going to take additional classes. They count towards GPA, but not towards the quality points of class rank. And so this policy currently mentions the courses you take during the day, but it does not put a limit, even though that has been our practice, is to have the limit of 8 courses per school year. And so, Mr. Collins, in consultation with the guidance department, as a housekeeping matter only, we recommend that we add the language to make it 8 courses per year during the regular school day. We'll provide that language, but we wanted, class rank can always be a very hot topic that you may hear input about. So we wanted to have this as a discussion item tonight, allow you to ask any questions, but provide families ample opportunity to provide input prior to approval on the 17th. And again, it doesn't change our practice, it just formalizes our policy. Did I miss anything, Mr. Collins?
Yeah. Well, that all classes, it doesn't discourage students from taking those extra classes. They will still show up in the GPA, and they will be on their transcript. They just won't count for class rank.
So they're limited to 8 classes?
8 classes for class rank. They can take 12 classes a year. The other 4 will count towards GPA. We don't use GPA as a measure of class rank. You get quality points for class rank. And so you can only, to have a level playing field, we can, because if you have unlimited resources, you can take as many college classes as you want and add those to the class rank. And so to keep everything equitable, equal, and everybody on the same playing field, we limit that, which is not uncommon in other school divisions as well. And that's been our practice. We just didn't have our policy tight enough to, in case there were questions about it. So just housekeeping. So we'll bring it back on the 17th for your approval again. We will encourage families who have input to provide that to your teachers and staff as well.
I remember when we put this in 2003, time I remember talking about that. Oh no, that's this one. The discussion that we had, there was a big uproar over this. Part of it was kids transferring to different grade scales, and did it come in as an A or did it come in as the number because their number was higher, and it was, I hate to see this thing come back.
I think this will be, I don't know, but I hope this will be the least controversial class rank policy regulation you've ever seen, Mr. White. I hope so.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to closed session. Mr. White.
Pursuant to section 2.2-3711A1A8 of the Code of Virginia, I move the board convene closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following matters. Discussion of personnel is authorized by section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia in consultation with legal. That was the word. Discussion and consideration of mission policy or disciplinary matters concerning the student or students in any state institution of higher education or any state school system as authorized by section 2.23711A2 of the Code of Virginia. Discussion of personnel is authorized by section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia. Okay. Consideration of exposure of student number 02-SH1920, and discussion of certain personnel recommendation of employment resignations.
I think that one's second one.
Since you don't keep it set.
Ms. Jones?
Mr. Alice.
Yes.
Mr. Foster.
Yes.